Hi, this is Paul, and this is Rough Draft for Sunday, where I walk through the current version of my Sunday sermon. This Sunday is Transfiguration Sunday in many churches around the world. There's a Revised Common Lectionary, and this Sunday is the Sunday where, as we're heading into Lent, we deal with the Transfiguration. And that's actually important. If you read, we've been going through the Gospel of Luke this year. If you read the Gospel of Luke, there's a transition that begins to happen later on in chapter 9 where Jesus, in the old translation, it says he sets his face to Jerusalem, and then the stories then follow up until the crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. But why do we do this? We have Easter, we have Christmas, we have Pentecost, we have Ascension Day, and then there's Transfiguration Sunday. Recently, someone in the Reformed Journal, a pastor in the Reformed Church of America, basically began by saying he doesn't know why. The Transfiguration story just doesn't mean that much to him. My friend Eric Dirksen counters pretty strongly on Twitter and says, bit of a scandal of the church order, and the Christian Reformed Church doesn't include Transfiguration on its list of worship services that ought to be held. And then Eric goes on to show church fathers who have, in fact, continued to talk about what on earth this story is about. Part of why this Sunday is important is because, and all these other Sundays are important, because they locate the life of Christ with your birthday and your wedding day and the day of your death and your dentist appointment. It brings Jesus into our lives and into this world and makes his resurrection, his birth, his transfiguration as part of this story that inhabits the same world that we inhabit now. We're reading again this year from the Gospel of Luke, about 8 days after Jesus said this. Now, I'm going to pause there because we're going to figure out, what he just finished saying, because that's important to the story. And this 8-day isn't just an arbitrary number. There was an old Israelite tradition and Jewish tradition about the 8th day, because of course on the 7th day God rested, and then that means on the 8th day it's like new creation or something new commences. On the 7th day, of course, Jesus dies on the 6th day. On the 7th day, he's in the tomb. And on the 8th day, Jesus rises from the dead. So right away, Luke is tipping his hand a little bit about this transfiguration is about something important. But let's jump back in Luke chapter 9 and figure out, what exactly was he talking about? Once when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him. It's so interesting how in private, that doesn't mean in private him being alone. Jesus is living in private with his disciples. They are part of his most intimate, closest group. They are seeing Jesus from the inside, without the filter, without the commotion of the crowd. He asked them, "Who do the crowd say that I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others that one of the prophets from a long time ago has come back to life." And so what's happening around Jesus is that they're seeing the miracles that are being done. They're watching how everyone's sort of hanging on his word. They're expecting something big to happen. Now, it's been interesting in the United States, of course, and having just been to Europe, and I attended this ARC conference, the world is all abuzz about the election of Donald Trump and the things he's been saying and the things he's been doing, and everybody's paying attention sort of at the top of the political hierarchy. Now, Jesus is not there. Jesus is walking around in the Galilee in places that don't really mean much of anything. He's not in Alexandria. He's not in Antioch. He's not even in Caesarea. He's, Capernaum, the sides of the Sea of Galilee, certainly not at Rome, but people have a tangible sense that with this man Jesus, something big is building, and they're beginning to wonder if maybe this Jesus is going to usher in a new world order. Maybe this Jesus is finally going to do what the Lord has promised his people Israel through the prophets for a very, very long time, and somehow God's chosen people will be put at the top of the world because, of course, if you're chosen for dominion and supremacy and leadership and power and control. And so, having watched Jesus do his miracles, they're imagining, maybe, but maybe now something is about to break and our time has come. And just like the Romans have had their time, and the Greeks have had their time, and the Persians have had their time, and the Egyptians have had their time, and maybe we had a little time during David, but that was small potatoes because now we know the world is so much bigger. Maybe now is our time. So Jesus says, well, what about you? Who do you say that I am? And Peter answered, God's Messiah, his anointed one, his chosen one, which is true. But what will that mean in terms of how events roll out on the ground? Because all the people's expectations of sort of a new world order, a new dawn beginning to break, and Israel finally coming into her inheritance and her promise, all of that is true. And so Jesus doesn't deny being God's Messiah, his anointed one, his one who is going to bring about this, but he understands quite clearly that all of the little narratives and pictures in their mind about how this is about to unfold might not be Jesus' plan. And so he's in private, and he's got his disciples there, and he's been praying, and his story is about to take a turn, and he wants them to know. He strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone. Well, why? I mean, if you're God's anointed one, why not be bold and in charge and big and loud and just come out and say it? Well, even his political advisors would probably say, well, the Romans will probably kill you pretty quickly. Okay. But I think there's more to that because, of course, we have these words like Messiah and anointed one, and everybody sort of imagines that there's something connected to this. And when that happens, well, certain things will happen, and you do certain things, and the world will respond, and then a certain number of things will roll out. And what's been abundantly obvious, and what's very obvious 2,000 years later, is that what is about to happen is not on anybody's radar screen. And he said, the Son of Man, now remember, that's that Daniel 7 character, that one that is, when the Ancient of Days sets up his throne in Daniel, and he comes with the clouds, remember the clouds, and he receives an eternal kingdom. Jesus has chosen this rather cryptic way of talking about himself to connect himself to that passage in Daniel. And again, people who know Daniel, their expectations have risen, but they have very specific ideas about how this is to roll out on the ground. And none of them include what Jesus is about to say. The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. In other words, this one who is anointed by God, the promised one for many generations, is about to suffer at the hands of those in authority over God's chosen people. And he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Now, Jesus has been doing a lot of things. And before my little trip, he raised a man from the dead, but that man will grow old and die. And as the story rolls out, when you get to the Gospel of John, he'll raise Lazarus from the dead, but Lazarus will grow old and die. And so they just really have no category for what Jesus is saying and doing. And anyone's script in their mind about a Messiah, they can think of David as a Messiah and Elijah as an anointed one. And there's all sorts of anointed people. Oh, prophets maybe, but Jesus? What are you saying? Then he said to them, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. And right there, that word cross must have jarred. Because if Jesus would roll out and say, I'm the Messiah, then a cross would probably await him. Because That's what Romans do to their political enemies, the ones that really don't have any status. Maybe a general rebelling might have the dignity of being put to death by cutting off his head. But if you're a Galilean or a Judean or a child of Israel, you're supposed to be a slave functionally. And so, yeah, a cross is what you can expect. And he says to his disciples that in this messiahship of him, his messiahship involves crosses for his disciples. And it's like, who's going to sign on to this? This is like no revolution. Anyone who wishes to be a revolutionary with me and overthrow the established regime must get ready to spend the rest of their life tortured and in prison. And completely failing in all of the metrics that everyone assumes overturning an established regime involves. But whoever wants to save their life will lose it. Yeah, you've been clear on that. But whoever loses their life for me will save it. Huh? I don't really think about a Roman cross as a life-saving strategy here, Jesus. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? Well, Can you remind me again about this Messiah thing? Because I really thought that when David, for example, overturned the Philistines, he was gaining the world. And when the Maccabees pushed out the Greeks, they were gaining the world. And then the Hasmoneans reigned for a good period of time, but never really sort of played out. And what we're really hoping for is a lot of those prophecies in the Old Testament to come to the fore, and that Jerusalem will be lifted up and supreme over the nations, probably in some way analogous to the way Rome is supreme over the nations. And this, generally speaking, is the kind of program we're signing up for, Jesus. Which sort of sets up the next sentence. Whoever is ashamed of me and my words, and it's like, yeah, I can understand why people would be ashamed of this strategy. It seems dumb. The Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his glory and in the glory of the Father and of his holy angels. So, you're going to overthrow the established regime, and at some point, this is going to involve you coming back with angels. Now the coming in with angels, we talked about that last week. That whole angelic choir thing, yeah, give them some swords and send them on down. And, if you can make Sodom blind just by one of those angels, you don't need a lot of angels to clean up the Roman legions. And, but we've got to associate with you who are talking about crosses and losing. And then in the end, you, when you actually do come with the angels, will turn your back on us. So in other words, if I lose today, I gain tomorrow. But boy, there have been so many tomorrows since those prophets way centuries ago, most of who died as Israel was beneath the Babylonians and the Assyrians and the Persians. What kind of a deal are you giving me? Truly, I tell you, some of you who are standing here will not taste death before they see the kingdom of God. Oh, so you have to at least be a little sympathetic to the disciples, because making sense of this is not easy. About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up to a mountain to pray. So they were praying before in private. Now we're going up to a mountain. Okay, this is routine. We've seen this all the way through the Gospel of Luke. The crowds are a mess. Everybody's bothering Jesus. He needs to pray. He needs to focus. He needs to be with his Father in heaven. I get all that. And Peter, James, and John don't even take the 12 or the 72 or however many are hanging on in this private group that Jesus is maintaining. We'll go up to a mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face changed. And his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Have you ever seen lightning? Have you ever tried to look at it when it's there? it's blinding. You close your eyes and you can still see it. And two men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor talking with Jesus. You see, after what Jesus had said, someone would be reasonable to have doubts about this whole business. But showing up with Moses and Elijah, shining like the sun, given their worldview where heaven is up there, where the sun is, and Moses, buried, hidden, but taken by God. Elijah went up into a chariot of fire, representing Moses and the prophets, the whole story of Israel. All of that is here. And here they have come down to talk and consult with Jesus. Maybe, just maybe, even though everything he said sounds crazy, maybe it isn't. Maybe the world is crazy and Jesus is sane. They spoke about his departure. He said he was going to die, which he was about to bring to fulfillment in Jerusalem. Well, then why don't you just skip Jerusalem and stay up here in the Galilee and maybe raise an army or something? And you march to Jerusalem with an army. How about that? Strategy? Jesus looking for advice? Peter and his companions were very sleepy. Jesus seems to be able to pray a long time. They all get weary and sleepy. And suddenly, they're awake now. It's probably not just a commentary on their physical experience and exhaustion, but probably a commentary too on the insight that they are gaining into just who it is that they've been following. They saw his glory. They saw his glory. And the two men standing with him. And as they were leaving, Peter said to him, Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Can you imagine? Go back down to the valley and say, you notice how when it turns dark at night, it's still sort of bright on that mountain? You know why? That Jesus, who you're really excited about, he sort of set up shop with Moses and Elijah and were put up booths. And if you want to really believe in Jesus, have Moses and Elijah validate him on top of the miracles, on top of everything, and then maybe. But the thing is, there's the sign of Jonah. And there's do miracles for me. And what we've seen about miracles is that again and again and again, they don't work on us like we think they would. And if you went and saw Moses, and if you went and saw Elijah, and if you actually saw Jesus do a miracle, maybe for the first day or two, you'd be like all geeked up about this, but very quickly you return to the mean. And then suddenly Moses and Elijah sort of become stock characters, and Herod and Caesar begin to ask questions like, well, how many tanks do Moses and Elijah have? To riff off one thing that Hitler was supposedly said about the Pope. Parenthetically, Peter did not know what he was saying. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared. Remember, the Son of Man comes with the cloud. Daniel 7. And a cloud appeared and covered them. And remember, a cloud was above the tabernacle, a cloud of fire by night, shining again, smoke by day. And a cloud would settle on the temple when the glory of God would come into the temple, and Moses and Elijah. And so it's like, if you're a child of Israel and you know these stories, and yeah, it's all fitting together. And they were afraid. Of course. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son whom I have chosen. Listen to him." Didn't we hear that at the baptism? And just like sort of having Moses and Elijah sitting on top of a mountain that everybody can come up scientifically and sort of, poke at it. Is that really Moses? If I'm gonna quiz you, Moses, about the stuff that's in Deuteronomy and see if you got it all right, and I'll quiz you, Elijah, about details about Ahab. But of course, I've got the details I have about Ahab and Moses, and there's no end to where this thing can go. when the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone, and the disciples kept this to themselves and did not tell anyone at the time what they had seen. Probably because, my goodness, what to make of it. And that Reformed Journal article says, oh, the story sort of leaves me cold. And it's like, why? Slow down and read the story and think about this. Because if you start telling people, they'll think you're nuts too. Just as nuts as the guy that just talked about taking up crosses and going to Jerusalem and being killed and all of that and being God's Messiah. C.S. Lewis, in his great sermon, The Weight of Glory, writes a lot about glory. I will turn next to the idea of glory. There's no getting away from the fact that this idea is very prominent in the New Testament and in early Christian writings. Salvation is constantly associated with palms, crowns, white robes, thrones, and splendor, like the sun and the stars. And this makes no immediate appeal to me at all, C.S. Lewis confesses. And in that respect, I fancy I am typically modern, sort of like this article from the Reformed Journal where he says, Transfiguration? How important could that be? Glory suggests two ideas to me, C.S. Lewis writes, of which one seems wicked and the other ridiculous. Either glory means to be fame, or it means luminosity. As for the first, since to be famous means to be better known than other people, the desire for fame appears to be a competitive passion and therefore of hell rather than heaven. As for the second, who wishes to become a kind of a living electric light bulb? And when I think about that Reformed Journal article, I think that's probably at that level that Lewis is. Okay, you glow like the sun, so what? I can set some dials and I can glow like the sun on my little video. And if I'm on stage and everything's dark and there's a spotlight on me, I'll sort of glow. And yeah, so what? Now, if you want Lewis's answers, you can read the whole thing, and I recommend it. Well, what was I doing in Europe? What did that mean? I'm meeting with, a lot of nobodies for the most part. Here in a British pub, and we all get together and we just have these chats. But at a few minutes, my hotel was near these massive parks in London, which are really cool. And I found this monument that I knew nothing about to Prince Albert, consort of Queen Victoria. And I was just blown away. I could not believe. I just saw on the map Prince Albert Monument, and I'd just seen the Queen Victoria thing out in front of Kensington Palace, and I thought, well, it'll be something like that. I'll go take a look at it. I get there, and it's like, not quite the Mount of Transfiguration, but it was like, wow. The gold leaf, the marble, the statue, the fence around it. It was, and having for the last number of years looked into symbolism and mythology and all of those kinds of things. It's like, my goodness, look at this thing. And right there behind me, there is Prince Albert. I knew almost nothing about him. The Victorians really knew how to do monument and symbolism because, well, we'll get into this a little bit. Now Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha was born on August 26, 1819 in Schloss Resenau, Germany. And he married his first cousin. I think if you had all that... Anyway, Queen Victoria on February 10, 1840, and became the prince consort of the United Kingdom. Now, he doesn't because she's queen, so he's just her husband. So he gets to be a prince consort. They have rules about these things. Albert was known for his support of public causes, such as educational reform and the abolition of slavery. He's like, whoa. Hey, he seems like a good guy. He played a significant role in organizing the Great Exhibition of 1851 and was a trusted advisor to Queen Victoria. Albert passed away on December 14, 1861 at the age of 42. Wow, he died young. He was only married 21 years. That's kind of sad. And, well, I guess she loved him. Seemed like a great guy. Quite the monument still, though. The Albert Memorial in London was commissioned by Queen Victoria in memory of her beloved husband, Prince Albert. The memorial, designed by Sir George Gilbert Scott, is located in Kensington Gardens, directly north of the Royal Albert Hall. Construction began in 1864. Let's see, he died in 61. America's fighting the Civil War. And the memorial was officially unveiled in 1872. The statue of Prince Albert was ceremonially seated in 1876. The American Centennial of Independence. I doubt it had anything to do with it. But look at him. And when you see this, it was a rainy day and it was raining. But he's up there in that gold leaf and he sort of shines like the sun. Not quite, lightning wattage, but not the luminosity of Jesus, but it's very clear. You've got all these other figures and you've got sort of godlike figures and things, but there he is. He's shining like the sun in his glory. And the effect that this has is, of course, subtle and psychological, but also real. And he's there sitting basically with some degree of authority. He's a prince consort. At the four corners of the monument are sort of the four corners of the Victorian dominion, and this is the one from Asia, and so you have someone seemingly from Chinese descent, and someone from India, and an elephant, and there was one from the Americas, and one from Europe, and one from Africa. So basically, it was his dominion. But if you look all the way up at the top, he is under the cross, and directly under the cross in gold leaf are angels. And again, if you look at symbolism and how these things work, it's like, oh, this is a whole world in this monument. There it is. You have basically this shield of glory around with the gold leaf, and then you have the statues of the four corners, and then it's all under the cross at the top. And again, when you see the cross again, we might think, well, that's Jesus, because nobody's that strange. And Albert isn't sitting at the top. He's sitting underneath. Now, he's certainly over all of those others underneath him, but he's under the cross. So Jesus comes, and he's appearing in his glorious splendor, and he's with Moses and Elijah. After Jesus had just finished saying the strangest things to them, he's knowing they're struggling because this is not Messiahship in any way, shape, or form that they would connect with. But he says, the world is wrong, and I am right. Believe in me. This is my son whom I have chosen. Listen to him. Why the eighth thing again? Because he is going to be delivered up. And he is going to be crucified. That's why that cross is above Prince Albert. And he is going to rise from the dead. And he is going to ascend. That eighth day is going to be the dawn of a new era and a new beginning, but that is going to come out and unfold in ways as surprising as the entire story around Jesus. In fact, the story of Jesus will be sort of the small model for the larger model, in the way that sort of the Prince Albert statue is a model of the British Empire at that time within their frame. But that cross at the top says something about, Jesus means it, and they don't understand it. And it's just as well they don't tell anybody now, because they would get it completely wrong and no one would understand. But afterwards, things are going to start to look different. Why is he so coy about the Messiah? Because of no category for what is about to come. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me, because whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. Whoever is ashamed of me and my words, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet lose or forfeit their very self? Now, would you want your wife of 21 years, who's also your cousin, making a monument about you? And you'd be thinking like, yeah, that's nice. She liked me. She really liked me. She liked me a lot. She made a gold statue of me and showed me in dominion under Christ, over the whole world. That's pretty cool. I looked around at a lot of monuments, and one of the interesting things was that, like the Victorian, sort of the peak, when the sun never sets on the British Empire, and it was big and it was glorious, but then you see the World War I monuments, and this particular monument, maybe I'll redo the slide or something. What's so interesting is that at the top of that World War I monument, there isn't a cross and angels and all of those things. It's just flat. There's nothing up there, and all you have are the soldiers, and the monument is because so many young men in England lost their lives in that war. It's just a generation was cut off, and the world changed again. And so we begin to wonder, and the world wondered, and churches wondered, and the culture wondered, probably not in a very different way from how the people of Israel wondered when the Romans came in and destroyed the temple again. But Christ's strange messiahship has, in fact, endured. And it worked a lot faster than Prince Albert, but also slower. And Jesus claims the whole world, edge to edge, but also top to bottom, shining like the sun and killed like a slave. I'm just learning about Albert. If I hadn't made this trip to London, if I hadn't wanted to stretch my legs and get a little exercise and walk around the park on that rainy afternoon, I may never have learned about Albert. Sounds like an absolutely wonderful man. But Jesus' monuments are everywhere, sometimes in wood and stone and metal. And there was one right there at the top of that Prince Albert Memorial. Not on the World War I one, though. Jesus is still alive, and he's still working, and his witness is still being borne by these ordinary people. Jesus shined for a moment, but he would come down from that mountain, be betrayed by a kiss, and arrested. And when they struck him, did he not bleed? And when they pierced his hands and his side, did he not die? Just like us. His monuments, his images, his witnesses are mostly in the flesh, almost often witnessing poorly to him. Molded not by a grieving monarch, but by his spirit, gone out into the world, taking shape in people for whom there will likely be no golden statue made in this age. But this was his plan all along. Because soon after this, when he would be gathered with his disciples and they would participate In the Passover, he would take bread and had broke it, and he would say, "This is my body broken for you." And he would pour wine and give it to them and say, "This is my blood shed for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Yes, he shines like the sun. Yes, he's the creator of heaven and earth. Yes, he has dominion and is seated at the right hand of the Father. And we are his witnesses, often witnessing poorly, but witnessing to his dominion from top to bottom. Amen.